Joe Biden, he's about 50 delegates away from clinching the Democratic presidential nomination. There were a bunch of primaries yesterday. CBS News projects that he won all 7 presidential primaries yesterday. The Associated Press is also projecting that he won Washington, D.C. The presumptive nominee can now officially meet the delegate threshold next week. So let us bring in CBSN political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns to talk a little bit more about this. Caitlin, Biden's wins plural, came just hours after he presented that speech here in Philadelphia, and he talked about the changes in policing and other changes in terms of race in this country. How were his comments received by Democrats?
Well, Democrats took his speech yesterday as a welcome first step in not only addressing these issues, but in showing a real contrast with Donald Trump. Remember, for the past couple of months, Biden has been like the rest of us, kind of trying to work from home and relegated to our living rooms. He's been broadcasting and campaigning out of his basement in Wilmington. Yesterday was just the 3rd time in the past couple of months that he was able to actually go outside, and the first time that he was able to actually leave his state. So it was an important moment for the campaign, but you're also hearing from Democratic lawmakers and from the protesters at events across the country that there's much more that needs to be done. Yesterday, Biden talked about putting a down payment on addressing systemic racism, pointed to some legislation he wants to see in Congress. We've seen lawmakers like Cory Booker and Ayanna Pressley come out in the past couple of days to put forward framework legislation that they believe can address these issues now. But you're hearing from many protesters that time and time again, they have pushed lawmakers to address these issues, that they have been told to vote and show up at the ballot box, and they just haven't seen the changes that are necessary. You hear from protesters that, generations have been marching and talking about these same things for years. So certainly a first step by the Biden campaign, was welcomed by many Democrats, but I think what you're hearing across the country is this push to do more than tell people to vote and to show up in that way.
So, Caitlin, the other thing that's interesting is yesterday was a test to see how mail-in voting would go as states limited in-person polling because of the coronavirus. What did we learn from yesterday's primaries?
There is a lot more work to be done when it comes to mail-in voting. This is something that is an issue at the forefront as we're just a few months away from the election, but also this is the first election that we'll see kind of in modern times during a pandemic. And so you've had a lot of lawmakers at the state and local level and the federal level talking about ways to improve the process in the event that people can't show up in person. So these primaries have been a trial run for that, and they show that there is a lot more work to do, and several issues have come about. First, just getting people the ballots in time to be able to fill them out and return them. Second, there's a huge issue in processing all of these ballots and getting these results out in a timely manner. And then you still have the component of people wanting to still show up in person to vote. There is a lot of, a lot of people say that they like to do this in person and they don't necessarily want to just wait to send their vote in. That also raises a lot of concerns. You could see in the District of Columbia and Maryland and in other states long lines to be able to cast your ballot to vote. So this is an issue that in the age of coronavirus, in the age of these protests that we've been seeing, really hovers over this presidential race because it addresses a lot of these issues about access to the vote. And you've seen a lot of secretaries of states from red and blue states saying that they need more resources to conduct these elections.
So there were also some pretty notable down ballot races. We got to talk about Steve King, longtime Iowa congressman, 9-term Republican, known long history of anti-immigrant, racist remarks. His last most high-profile comments actually got him kicked off of his committees by his own party. Do we know if this behavior is finally what has resulted in him losing the primary, or are there other elements at play?
Well, last night, as those results were coming in, you heard from lots of Republican establishment figures cheering King's exit. He has long been a weight on the party in Congress, although he has, well-documented history of racist remarks and comments. And so he had been stripped from his committee hearings. There had been an effort underway to oust him through a primary, and that happened last night. So you saw many members of the Republican establishment cheering on the exits, and Democrats as well, of course. No love lost, but also Democrats really pushing for turnout in that district in Iowa in November, because there still is an election there. J.D. Shulkin, the Democrat, will face off.
Caitlin, can I just ask you quickly also about what we've been talking about this morning and yesterday, which is the president's use of a church and a Bible for a photo opportunity, the use of the military to move away peaceful demonstrators. It's not lost on me that several reporters yesterday tried to get Republicans to comment on the president's actions, and none of them, or a very small few of them, would say anything on camera. And, there's an old Latin proverb, he who is silent is taken to agree. I don't understand, if you don't want to say anything because you're afraid the president's going to tweet at you, but you're still being silent, which in this Latin proverb, silence is complicity. So even if you're afraid that you're going to be hit on Twitter by the president of the United States, you still got to go back to your district or to your states and explain to the voters why you refuse to take a stand. Why do you think that so many Republicans are reluctant to even say anything other than Lankford and a couple of others, Ben Sass, who have released sort of tepid statements?
Right, and Lisa Murkowski was the only one that I heard yesterday say that she didn't like what happened. It is significant that several of those lawmakers said that they weren't really familiar with it, which I think is just absolute malpractice if you didn't see what was going on. So that's not an excuse. I think it does show still how Donald Trump with the Republican Party is still very popular. What we're looking for, however, especially in these next few weeks, as these demonstrations are taking place not only in cities, but also in suburban areas as well, whether we are going to see a continued shift of some Republican voters away from the president, the way that we saw in 2018, especially in those suburban areas where longtime Republicans were saying that they don't like the president's rhetoric and they were inclined to vote for Democrats. And so that's something to watch for. But I think yesterday shows, even with an issue like that, which garnered widespread criticism, not only from Democrats, but also from some former Republicans, some former aides in Congress, and some in the military, about kind of how egregious that was, that Donald Trump still has a hold on his party. But what Democrats are focused on are really focused on these suburban areas, but also increasing turnout in areas where they didn't see it in 2016. So there's been a lot of talk, as we've discussed, about how Democrats plan to win back areas that they lost in 2016 in the Michigan and in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. And there's been this debate of do you try to win back Trump supporters, or do you try to kind of turn out your own voters? And I think that's something that continues to be looked at. And I think what we're seeing with these protests across the country are an opportunity for Democrats to really listen to their own base as well.
All right. Really, really interesting discussion. Yeah, Caitlin, so good to have you. Thank you very much for that. Really appreciate it.